I call to meeting the order of McLendon-Chisholm Board of Adjustments on Monday, December 7th at 7 p.m. If everyone will stand for the pledges. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, indivisible. I just missed those two words. I know. Seems like there ought to be something else there. Okay, next on the agenda, citizens' comments. We don't have nobody wants, we had nobody, okay. We'll move on from item number 3. Item number 4, approval of the minutes from the August 31st, 2020 Board of Adjustments meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look them over? Are there any corrections or additions? I will take a motion to approve. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Okay, we are here tonight for a public hearing to consider the application of Richard Bullock requesting a variance to the minimum lot width from 300 feet to 26 feet for the purpose of providing a private driveway for access to the 2 proposed lots. We will hear from staff first and then the applicant. Mr. Coker?
Chair, members of the board, Michael Coker representing the city of McLendon-Chisholm. We've got a short PowerPoint. You've got my staff report, and the staff has recommended approval. I want to take you through the the presentation. This is the only screen that's going to work, so if you look that way, we'll go through it. It's about 15 slides. Next slide. So you already know that this is a request to reduce the required frontage of 300 feet to 26 feet for one lot and to 0 feet for the second lot. Next slide. Okay, this shows you the property that we're talking about, the Bullock property, and the 26 feet is there on 550. Next slide. The zoning on this property is zoned ag, and if you can see where it says paddock, the property is immediately adjacent to that paddock word on the right-hand side. Next slide. So our zoning chart says that you have to have 300 feet. Let me go over. And then on the right-hand side, that chart gives you all the information about the agriculture zoning district, and it requires 2.5 acres of land for a lot in the agricultural district. Next slide. So I wanted to take you on a little visual tour here so you see what we're talking about. I'm standing on 550 right behind that sign and just to the right of that fence which divides the subdivision that has paddock in it, back a good long distance. And so you can see that. Next slide. And so I'm going to take you around kind of clockwise. This is the next slide, taking a look at it. Next slide. Now there's a house on 1.8 acres that's not a part of this application. It's been there since before it was in the city. It's a tract of land. It's not a lot and block. We have the same issue with the 26-foot and the flag lot that exists behind it. Next slide. As you're coming around, you can see that as you look further up to the north and east, there's some more residential and farmland. Next slide. And that's 550. They just resurfaced it. Next slide. And coming around now, it's looking kind of more to the east. Next slide. Large lots, open space, farms, ranches. Next slide. Looking kind of to the south now. Next slide. That takes you back, looking back down 550, and you can see that subdivision that I was telling you about there on your right-hand side, and that is on the northeast side of 550. Next slide. So the staff recommendation is for approval, and if you decide to approve this, there are a number of conditions that I've asked you to include. The subject property must be platted into 2 lots in the configuration as shown on the attached exhibit, which we're going to get to in just a second, that shows the lot layout proposed by the applicant. Then a platted access that includes utility and fire lane easements must be shown on the new subdivision plat that connect to proposed Lot 2 from FM 550. So that 26 feet right now takes you back, and there's actually 2 tracts of land that have been by Mr. Bullock that are combined as a part of this application, but that's not the way the lots are laid out. Each proposed lot has to have a minimum of 2.5 acres in order to conform with the zoning regulations that are in place already for the property. Emergency services via a fire lane easement has to be provided on any new plat that conforms to the International Fire Code as adopted by the city, and including a turnaround for fire apparatus and emergency access vehicles that exists as shown on the next slide. And this is the exhibit, next slide, that shows how that easement. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have about this, and I know that the applicant is here to answer questions on their own.
Mr. Coker, I have several questions that we received from one of the neighbors.
Yes, and we did get one
We received
response.
one answer back, and it was they are opposed
Yes,
to the
ma'am.
request. And I would like to ask you these questions, if you can answer them.
Sure.
And if not, we'll move the applicant to answer them. Is this easement also going to function as Mr. Bullock's utility easement?
Yes.
Are the utilities going to be below or above ground?
That has not been determined yet, but it does operate as the utility easement for both lots.
Is when McLendon-Chisholm, and I would just say it's misspelled, and you know how that irritates me. When McLendon-Chisholm says fire lane, is it like McKinney, Texas fire lane requirements listed below? The fire lane shall be constructed with a minimum 6-inch thick, 4,000 PSI concrete with steel reinforcing of number 4 bars, spaced 24 inches on centers in each direction. The base course thickness should be a minimum of 6 inches thickness and consist of lime or cement stabilization as recommended in the geotechnical report.
No.
They will follow city standards.
Yes, the fire chief for McLendon-Chisholm has, for residential uses that are not public streets, has allowed for a variety of surfaces that can support his equipment, and that's a minimum of 75,000 pounds. You may recall that a few years ago there was a tower that was proposed, and it was on residential property. We allowed a 24-foot wide access drive with I think 6 or 8 inches of flex base compressed that, and with an engineer's certification that it could hold up the emergency services equipment that we had at the time. We have equal to that now, and so my understanding is that the chief would allow that kind of configuration in this situation, or something better.
Okay. Is a 75-foot, it says inch, I know he means foot, turnaround required? And the
Yes.
answer is yes. This easement is private property, so who has the duty to maintain it and who will enforce that duty?
The private property owners.
And the city will not enforce it.
No, we will not. As a matter of fact, when they prepare the subdivision, because they'll have to come back through the city, we will have a homeowners association, as required by our code, that will determine how maintenance for the access, utility, and fire lane will be maintained.
And if at some point the condition of that road on private property no longer allows a fire truck to go down it, what do we do?
The homeowners association covenants will tell us how we can resolve that. It will not fall to the city to do it, but I can tell you that if there's a lender, and there's almost always a lender, and we can't get our apparatus in there, the lender's going to make sure that the roadway is brought up to a standard that our emergency equipment can get into and operate on.
Dallas requires residential properties greater than 150 feet from a paved road to have life safety sprinkler. We do not require that, correct?
Well, it depends on the size. Any structure with 5,000 square feet or more is required to have an automatic fire sprinkler system installed. We don't require that for uses that are under 5,000, but whether it's a house or a business, when you get to 5,000 square feet, you're going to have a sprinkler system.
And ours doesn't say anything about being a certain distance from paved road requires that.
No, ma'am. And Dallas's doesn't say that either.
Subject property is located at the bottom of a hill, thus the pond. A great deal of drainage comes across that property during the spring rains. Is the developer being required to have an engineering study completed as is required in Heath?
Well, it's also required in McLendon-Chisholm, and the answer is yes. They will, as part of the platting process, they will be required to submit the engineering that shows how they're going to deal with the drainage.
My fear is that we are a little farm community trying to play big town. Do we have any enforcement mechanism to ensure compliance with the developer's promises?
And I think we do have the ability to enforce the rules, both with the platting regulations, the subdivision oversight, the homeowners association that will be required, and it'll be subject to review and approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. And in addition to that, we do have the ability to enforce our codes, both from a criminal and a civil standpoint.
Any other questions for Mr. Coker?
Yes, I do. The illustration we're looking at on page 14 that shows the 14 properties outlined in red, this is a new development under management by one developer. Is that what I'm hearing?
This is the people that were notified. That's what this map is.
Oh, okay.
That's the notification map of who was notified about the variance request.
So these lot numbers don't correspond to any formal
Correct.
association?
Number 13 and 14 are the pieces in question.
Yeah, look at the ones that Richard Bullock, I think 1 and 2.
Not on the notification map.
Eh,
I do not. A 1 and 2 in the middle. I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Thank you.
1 and 2 should be the
Thank
2
you.
properties
Okay.
that are the subject of the board action today.
Okay, so Shelley, I just figured out where the resident owns. Okay, gotcha. Sorry, Gary.
Okay. Do the 2 properties maintain the 2.5 acre minimum if you take out the or a 26-foot drive or easement?
Lot
Is that
1,
still allowed to be in their property, even though it's an easement, is it still included in the 2.5 acre minimum?
yes.
So it
And,
does
and
meet,
and both lots, Board Member Nickel, both lots meet the 2.5 acre minimum lot size. Lot 2, because it doesn't have that flagpole extension, it actually looks a little bit bigger when you take a look at it, but they both have 2.74 acres.
okay. Who will have title of that easement driveway?
I am requiring, if the board approves this, I'm requiring that that be a platted easement, and Lot 1 will be responsible by way of the homeowners association for the 2 lots to manage access up to the fire department turnaround, and then Lot 2 will be responsible for the management of the fire department turnaround on that portion of the property.
Is there going to be any ongoing association between lots 1, 2, and 12 as indicated on page 14? Or will they be severed once the properties are sold?
Which is Lot 12, Gary?
12 is the one that on the highway.
It's the house
Where
in
the
front.
house,
Yeah.
where the house is.
I don't think that there's a relationship between, and they're here today. I mean, the applicants, wait until we're done. But I'm not sure that there's any relationship that's going to be ongoing between the existing house that's on the 1.8 acres that fronts on 550 and the new applicants, but they can answer for themselves.
Is there any restriction on how many houses or other buildings can be constructed on these 2 lots?
Yes, sir. Each lot can have 1 main home and an accessory structure, which does not include a swimming pool. So you could have a detached driveway, a detached garage, a workshop, something like that. But once you get beyond 1, then it requires that they get additional permission.
So this differs from the similar application we dealt with 2 years ago, which was in the ETJ, that now has at least 5 houses on it.
Yes, sir. Because in the city, and because this is in the city, we get to regulate not only the platting, but the use of the land. Whereas in the property that was out there on 1139, that's outside the city limits, we got to do the plat, but it's the county that regulates land use, not us.
On this page 14 illustration, it shows lots 1 and 2 being significantly different size, even though they're indicated to be nearly the same. Is that just an error where they drew the dividing line?
That's why I put in, because I drew this off of a survey that they provided for me. That's why I put in the conditions, if the board were to approve it, that they have to have no less than 2.5 acres in order to conform to the zoning that's required. And if they don't, when they come back in with a plat that's prepared by a registered professional land surveyor, if it doesn't meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance, the board, the Planning and Zoning Commission can't recommend approval, and the council can't approve it because it's got to conform.
Referencing the pond that's located on lot 1, it appears to be right in the middle of where you probably want to build. Is that going to affect the availability or the suitability of the lot for further development?
I think that's a question that the applicants will have to answer. If they cannot answer it now, they'll have to answer it during the platting, because grading and drainage is one of the things that you have to provide the engineering for.
Can't just be filled in?
If it's filled in, it still requires engineering.
And if it's filled in, they would have to do something else with the drainage. Most of the drainage probably goes into that pond. Any other questions, Gary?
That's all I have, thank you.
Mr. Coker, I have one more.
Yes, ma'am.
The width of proposed lot 1 and 2 does not meet the 300 feet requirement. Are they going to have to come back for 2 more variances? Or because we are granting it, possibly granting it for the 26 feet on the very front, the back is not considered?
Okay, if the board decides that they're going to approve this, the motion needs to include the language that I put in the staff report, which talks about Lot 1 being reduced from 300 reduced from 300 feet to 0 feet. So that they won't have to come back if you decide that that's what you want to do. So Lot 1, which is the forward lot, reducing the 300 feet to 26 feet, and the second lot, which is the one in blue on the exhibit, you're reducing the 300 foot required to 0, because it will have no frontage.
Okay, I'm going to need you to show me where that is in your report, because I do not see it in the conditions. But he's got approval of the variance with these conditions. It's these also? Both of these, okay, thank you.
Make sure all of that stuff is in there, because this is a unique piece of property.
Is that me?
So it's the fact that they want to do 2 lots that brings them to you and ultimately brings them back to the rest of the city when it comes to platting, because they want to have, they're creating 2 lots out of 5.487 acres. That's it.
Any other questions for Mr. Kirkland?
May I ask one? If this doesn't have to be platted, my concern would be if the lots are large enough and it doesn't require platting. As far as fire concern, I think sometimes the fire chief does make them put a hydrant, you know, when it's that far, that distance goes that far back, and I can't quite make out the distance because my eyes aren't good enough here, but, and that one may even require 2. It just looks like that's, what is that distance all the way to the back, do you know?
400 feet.
Oh, is that all?
Well, and that turnaround is about 400 feet back, and they are likely to have to put a hydrant in there. That's why I've laid out not only a fire lane easement, but a utility easement as part of the requirement. And whether it's underground or not is not, that's not for me to say, but
Lisa, it looks like the whole length of the property is 1,078.
Right.
My eyes are reading correctly?
That's what I thought I read too.
well, it could be.
But that's the easy. Hydrants.
Even if it is approved, just a cautionary note, we've had some water issues lately, and the applicants might want to just check with the water companies to make sure that they can get the required pressure. I know that the fire chief would check, you know, to make sure that that could happen at the time that it was put in, but just ahead of time, just to make sure they don't go too far in the process and spend a lot of money and then can't do something. Even if it's approved tonight, before they go too far with it, they might want to just check on it.
Good advice.
One more question. The properties and the easement will all remain private property. None is being deeded to a utility or the city or anything. So will utility installations be, will the cost of utility installations be required of the homeowners?
So that's a two-part question, Gary. The first part is there likelihood to be any part of this property that is dedicated to somebody else? And the answer is yes, because the
Those numbers, I didn't see 80 feet anywhere
That's,
previously.
Gary, what he's talking about is on each side of 550. So it would go an extra 10 feet up the driveway, the 26-foot driveway. But if you're asking, is that 26-foot driveway fire lane going to be dedicated to the city or anyone else? The answer is no.
And if it's private, then the homeowners would have to pay for laying utilities, right?
Yes, and maintaining the road.
Good. Okay, you've said association again, and my first question was, will there be any association in charge of this development? Because I thought that all those houses were being grouped together. You just said association again. Which properties are you referring to in an association? That's a subdivision of two?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is how I make sure that they work together, because if for some reason whoever's building on lot number one doesn't like whoever's building on lot number two, they need a civil remedy that's available to them in case whoever has the front goes to the Invocation. So that's where it's away. And we have this for all the rest of our subdivisions.
Any other questions for Mr. Parker?
Yes. I just want to make sure I have all the right information. So there are 3 lots that would have one owner for 2 of the lots and a separate owner, the frontage lot,
let me,
1.8 acres, and the separate owner on the other 2. That's right. They're not a part of this, but that 1.8 acres is granted the easement to get to the other 2 lots?
the easement already exists. I think that what happened at some point in time, this probably was an 8-acre tract or something like that, and the people who live on the 1.8 acres got that. It was before it was in the city, so they were able to do things that the county allowed them to do.
I'm going to correct you on that just a little bit. This house is not that old. The city was formed. My guess is, and this is strictly a guess, whoever built the front house owned it all at one point and decided to sell the back half off and didn't really keep enough, but the city didn't know it.
I'll give you that.
That happens all the time.
It does.
Well, and then I have a question also, as long as it's a that's unusual.
That would be my guess as to what happened over years, but it's a guess. The front owner, no.
No.
I
You
don't
can,
believe so.
whoever the owner is of the 1.8 acres, it's on the list with the little map. And it's not Richard Bullock. He's the owner of the 2 tracts that we're talking about.
The purpose of these lots are the new homes, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is zoned agricultural?
Yes.
And you said they're going to form an HOA for 2 lots
Yes.
exclusively? Has it been considered to be private road? Routing? Or is it really not private?
The problem is that you only have 26 feet, and the minimum lot width for a road of any kind in the city is going to be 50 feet. So I thought that the easement concept was a good way to solve the access, drainage, utilities, and confront the development of this little subdivision.
It just seems like a possible solution to actually have a private road versus
If I had 50 feet,
if you have to. And all the mailboxes are going to go on the first 1.8 acre?
I think it will probably go in the 26-foot easement on the edge of it. But don't get me lying.
That will be up to the post office to decide. Because that's an easement even in front of the 1.8. Correct?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, it slopes down, I think 5 or 6 feet probably from the top of where I was standing on the street to the bar ditch that's down there.
I have one more question, and this is a future question.
Yes, ma'am.
When they come to subdivide this with their plat, will they ask for a zoning change from ag to a subdivision? Does that automatically happen to a 2.5 acre subdivision, or will it stay ag?
It'll stay ag. Because ag, interestingly enough, we have a 2.5 zoning district, but the ag zoning district also has a minimum lot size of 2.5 acres. I would hesitate to try and change the zoning, and we've gone into zoning now, but I would hesitate to try and change the zoning on a 5-acre tract to something that might get me in trouble with spot zoning. And so I would be reluctant to do that if that was.
Any other questions for Mr. Kirker? All right, we reserve the right to call you vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Mr. Bullock's representative is Jennifer Capoli. Did I butcher that really bad? Copioli. If you would like to step forward, please.
Can I designate these 2 gentlemen to do that for me? They know way more about this than I do. I just
Is
did
that
the
legal?
paperwork.
Okay. Let's make sure it's legal. Yes,
Is that
yes.
okay?
Just identify yourself when you stand to speak,
Thank
please.
you.
And maintain your social distance.
Maintain our social distancing, okay. How about this?
Social circle. We're in this.
Even though you may really like each other?
My name's Paul Copioli. I'm Jen's husband.
I'm Danny Perez, and this is my family here, so.
Hello. Well, the first thing I'd like to say, I know the person's question, they didn't know what. They keep saying developer. I mean, literally, that piece of property is too big. Well, because about 2.5 acres, and there's not a lot of that available. That's not in a subdivision. At least,
Yeah.
we haven't been able to find any that
I-
we can.
And not to,
I can correct you on that. There are subdivisions that you can do your own builder on. You just have to get the right subdivision.
contractors, I'm in real estate, own a real estate business, property management business, and we'll be doing it all under that. And there'll be beautiful homes. We were actually neighbors in them. We were there 8 years, I think, too.
Yeah.
We can afford all this.
Fire, it's near and dear to Jen and R's heart. Not while we were living.
He didn't build it, by the way.
We just bought, we
Yeah.
designed it and
Yeah.
they built it. But, so when you're talking about or the minimum. Well, to strike twice.
Yeah. And I think that addressed everything.
I mean, at 26 feet, it's just the way this property was built. We've been looking for different properties. We're just trying to go through the right steps to make sure that we.
And I don't think there's anybody that's going to develop this as nice as what we plan on doing. He's going to put a modern home. We're going to put a craftsman home. That's what our plans are.
It was the pond.
Oh, the pond.
That's your
Yes, the
property. That's the
pond.
property you're
So
going
the pond, I'm going to use it. So we'll kind of be catacomb. I mean, we feel like we'll add value all the way around. So I'm glad to hear we only have one objection to us so far. So that's all I have.
Yeah.
Y'all have any questions for us?
I only have one. And you heard everything tonight that was laid out, and you've already indicated that you hope you're able to afford it. So I just want to make sure that you understand everything that Mr. Coker has said about if this passes, what we are going to require. Do you have any questions about any of that before we move forward?
The only one we may have a question on, everything. We didn't
Yeah.
capture those costs in our, mental.
Running that.
We got water when we were in Kingsbridge from the same place we're going to
Yeah.
get water now from.
We won't get water pressure, so
Yeah.
that's a good question.
Yeah, unfortunately, you don't have a choice on who the water comes from.
Right.
Right, we
know.
understand.
Not to butt in, I just happen to know that that water district is about to make some upgrades, and I just don't know what's going to be affected by it, so you just might want to have not that
Okay.
it should affect your decision in any way, it just might be a conversation you want to have early with them.
No, that's a really good
No,
point.
it's a good
Thank
point,
you.
thank you. Yeah. We're concerned about that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions for these two gentlemen? Okay.
Yeah, we prefer to have it below. It's going to really be up to the utility companies, my experience, and what they're going to do running those lines out there. So,
It's, if you want to pay for underground is what it'll come down to.
yeah, well,
Would be
that's
my
what
guess.
Yeah,
That's what we prefer.
yeah, we don't want big old telephone poles coming up.
Okay, any other questions for these two gentlemen? Okay, I am going to close the public hearing. It's 7:39 and go back into our regular meeting. Item number 6 is consideration and action regarding the request of Richard Bullock, requesting a variance to the minimum lot width from 300 feet to 26 feet for the purpose of providing a private drive for access to the proposed lot. If it is someone on the commission's desire to make a motion in favor, I would caution you to use all of the wording that has been provided to us by our city planner. Is there any discussion? I will entertain a motion.
I would be willing to make such a motion, but I'm a little lacking for a template on how to incorporate the necessary words.
If you look at page 11, it will be under the request and just below staff recommendation, those two paragraphs.
I'm looking for the part about zero.
It's in the request.
Oh, it's above that, okay. Okay. And again, I'm not sure how to form that into even 2 or 3 concise sentences. Is there a template we can use that would?
It's going to be a whole lot more than 2 or 3 sentences. Would you like me to take a stab at it, and then you can say what she said? Can we do that? Yes. Okay. This is what I would say. Make a motion to approve the variance request based on these restrictions. The subject property must be platted into 2 lots generally, the configuration as shown on the attached exhibit that shows the lot layout proposed by the applicant, and a platted access utility and fire lane easement must be shown on the new subdivision plat that connect to proposed Lot 2 from FM 550 right-of-way. Each proposed lot must contain no less than 2.5 acres of land. Emergency services via fire lane easement shall be provided that conforms to the International Fire Code as adopted by the City of McLendon-Chisholm, including an approved turnaround at the dividing line between proposed lots 1 and 2. This request reduces the required street frontage for proposed Lot 1 from 300 feet to 26 feet, and the variance request for proposed lot number 2 reduces the required street frontage from 300 feet to 0 feet, but provides access to the public way via an access easement.
I like the way that sounded. So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That was five ayes. Motion passes. The variance has been granted. I move to adjourn this meeting at 7:42. Shelley, do you want to respond to this gentleman? Do you want to respond to this gentleman, or do we owe him a response? Okay, I've made notes here in what he said.
Yeah, I had talked to you previously about that lot that we subdivided
To be
2
real
years
honest,
ago.
my eyes are so bad I couldn't
And I
see
finally
that much.
got driven to
I'm right there with you.
It need to be bigger.
so you can see better what's happening.
Hi, Val. I'm good, how are you?
It started this end. This is 1139 out here. This is the house you see from the road. And this is their private drive that runs to the back of the property. There was a little house built here. I think it was the second house built.
Is it all?
Then they built this house clear at the back. And then what we thought was going to be,
I just need to, shut that boil notice not too long ago. I know that they're gonna.
Okay, got it.
They're talking about putting an elevated tank behind some of the bird area. And I know it's not exactly right there, but I just don't know what's gonna be. I just don't know what that's, I don't know what the current conditions are. And it's just a conversation they probably need to have before they decide what it is. I mean, it doesn't affect here. I mean, they can always approve it and decide not to do it. It's just something, before I spend money on it, I would want to go talk to them.
as conditions of the plan, or getting those to them. They have to do steps to it. 180 days. And that way it's not an open-ended forever.
I think we have a time limit. I'd have to go look it up, but I think if you don't do it within a period of time, it expires. I'd have to go look at it. It may be 180 days.
Hey, Greg.